Good evening, everyone. I'm David Sproles, the president of the New York School of Interior Design, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Arthur King Satz Lecture, an endowed lecture we hold annually in honor of our esteemed former NYSED president, who's actually, if you can all turn around, his portrait is on the back wall. I've been president for a number of years, and I still don't have a portrait, but we'll talk about that later. We hold this lecture annually. The lecture features someone who works at the intersection of design and the humanities. This year, we are grateful to be hearing from interior designer Michael Simon. Did I hear a clap? Michael will be sharing with us insight into his career as an interior designer, furniture creator, and collector. Founded in 1995, his firm, Michael Simon Interiors, is a boutique practice with projects across the United States and abroad. Michael works closely with craftsmen and the techniques that inform each project to create a level of artisanry that reflects a mastery of the decorative arts. Across this practice, he remains committed to mentorship and to the continued study of the classical tradition. Michael's expertise is grounded in decades of independent study, including archival research at Scalamandre and a long engagement with design history and literature. He is also committed to historic preservation, serving on the board of Edith Wharton's The Mount in Lenox, Massachusetts, and consulting on projects including Manhattan's Morris Jumel Mansion. In keeping with the theme of the Satz Lecture, we are hearing from Michael in another way this evening, and this is the first. I've been here 26 years. This is the first. He will be performing for us on the piano. Trained as a composer under the legendary Stephen Sondheim and John Corigliano, he pursued music at the Carnegie Mellon University and the Manhattan School of Music before turning to design, a transition that continues to shape the structure and intention behind his work. His design philosophy is shaped by his musical training, drawing on principles of composition and structure that he's long described as composing rooms. Now, before I hand the podium and the piano over, I just want to remind everybody that there's a little gathering in our gallery behind us with drinks and food, so please join us there after the lecture so we can continue the conversation. I'm not sure if we're dragging the piano in there, but we'll talk about that later. But please join us afterwards. But Michael, we're thrilled to have you here, and the podium is all yours. So.
I just want to say, speaking of Stephen Sondheim, he famously wrote in a musical called Merrily We Roll Along, I don't perform except at dinner. So, okay, you want to go ahead? Yeah. Yeah, this is, so you're going to hear a 30-second piece of music that I wrote about 50 years ago for a radio program in New York that was called Center Stage. And it's so old, and it was on reel-to-reel tape, but we had it digitized so that you could hear what was going on in his brain. Okay. So I do appreciate the invitation to speak here tonight, and I am sorry that I never knew Arthur Satz because I did a little bit of research about him, and he must have been a man of great culture and curiosity. I was surprised to learn that his first career was in music, and he attended a number of universities as a music major. And he was a Fulbright scholar studying in Munich before completing his graduate work at Princeton. He taught music at Vassar and at Yale. And he pivoted from music to design in 1963 when he became associated with NYSED, eventually becoming president and chairman of the board in 1975. Notably, it was under his leadership that NYSED became a degree-granting institution. doing a little bit more digging, I learned that his predecessor, Sherrill Whiten Jr., whose father founded NYSID in 1916, was trained as a composer at Princeton and UCLA Berkeley, suggesting that this dialogue between music, design, and the humanities has very deep roots here. So I guess by now you know that my formal education was in music and that I was trained to become a composer. From a young age, I was drawn to writing music for the theater. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I can report that my own popular culture predates my life, and it was very influenced by my parents' popular culture. They had a number of original Broadway cast albums that I listened to when I was a youngster, and one of the records that they had was a 1965 musical entitled Do I Hear a Waltz, which was written by the very famous Richard Rodgers and a lesser-known but up-and-coming composer-lyricist named Stephen Sondheim. I was 14 years old at the time and decided to go to the public library to research this young collaborator of Richard Rodgers. In those days, Who's Who in America listed home addresses and phone numbers for the people who were referenced in the book. I copied down Mr. Sondheim's address and wrote him a letter inquiring if I sent him my music in the mail, would he critique it? And I never heard from him, and to my astonishment, months later, we were at the dinner table, and my sister Gail heard her phone ringing upstairs, and she bolted from the dining room thinking it was a date, and came back to the dining table very disappointed and said, there's somebody on the phone for you named Stephen Sondheim, and please tell your friends not to use my number. So I ran upstairs, and he said, I'm sorry, that it's taken me so long, but I've been busy. Was he ever? And he said, I can give you an appointment in 3 months. So by the time I met him, I was 15 years old. And he was very, very generous, and I ended up studying privately with him for 5 years. And this, by the way, this photograph is circa 1970, and so I looked for a picture of Sondheim from that moment, and that's exactly what he looked like, chain smoking all the time. I will say he was a very, very generous mentor, and he taught me, most importantly, about craft, process, and an intellectual approach to writing music. And I'm firmly convinced that if I'm a competent interior designer, it's because he taught me how to think. He taught me how to think as a composer. And it turns out that at the root, music and design are strikingly equivalent. Instead of manipulating notes and time, I'm manipulating space and objects. As you heard, I continued my education. I went to Carnegie Mellon University and Manhattan School of Music, where I learned more about composition and studied orchestration, conducting, and so on. Orchestration probably was my favorite activity, having to do a lot with color. In the 1980s, the National Endowment for the Arts named me one of the top 5 composers in the country for a form called opera theater. Nonetheless, and despite the recognition, I needed a daytime job to support my music. And I found a position as a temp, working for Manpower, doing word processing in the strategic planning department at Citibank. Years passed. I was there for about 12 years, and I parlayed my way into creating a department of interior design and directing that department. And that was for the tri-state area. As our offices, we had moved our offices out of Manhattan to the very large Citicorp building in Long Island City, which at the time was the only big building there. There were no towers. And I could see from my office this building that you see over here that says Scalamandre Silks. That was their mill in Long Island City. And so I thought that I would approach the owners of the mill to help create a program in textiles, wall coverings. They were involved in carpets with us also, that would create a recognition in the same way that the Golden Arches did for McDonald's. And so I contacted Jana Scalamandre Bitter. She was the daughter of Franco and Flora Scalamandre, and her husband Ed Bitter, to see if they would be interested in collaborating on this project for the bank. And they were. And that meeting with them proved pivotal entirely in my trajectory. So after I got to know them and we talked about the project, and I was over there with some frequency, Jana opened the company's archives to me. And they had, at the time, a vast collection of 18th and 19th century documents, textiles, and trimmings that were primarily Italian, French, and American. And that window, looking at their archives, going in there and studying it with some regularity, ignited my years-long passion and deep interest in the history of interior design. Several years later, after the Citibank thing, had come to fruition and we were redoing our branches, the Bitters called me, and they said that they were going to move their flagship building from the 10th floor of an office building on 57th Street to a 5-story townhouse on 3rd Avenue across the street from Schumacher, for those of you who might remember that, now Dwayne Reed, I think. And they asked me if I would design the showroom, knowing that I could manage a commercial project, but also appreciating the fact that I was deeply interested in their collections, archives, and the lines that they were at the time weaving and promoting. So I was still working at Citibank, and I like to characterize that period with the acronym that I was dual income, no children. Those people were dinks. I was a stink. I was a single, dual income, no children. But when they asked me to do this, I said to them, I'd be delighted to do it, but I want to do the window display for your opening gala. And they agreed to it. And I said to them, I think you're going to have to finance the backgrounds, the furniture, the upholstery, et cetera, and I don't want you to micromanage me. I want to do what I want to do. And they agreed to it, remarkably. So I designed a boiserie. I have a very greedy eye, and I love backgrounds, and I spend a lot of time developing backgrounds. Here you can see in that little niche that has a piece of furniture that is called a bergère d'angle, that there are curtains there. And we took a document from the 18th century French and had it woven as if it had oxidized over a period of 230 years. Similarly, so with the passementerie. And there's a chair in the foreground on the left. That was an 18th century document, a stripe that had flowers strewn on it. And I said, let's get rid of the flowers and just do it as a stripe. And it made it much more contemporary, but it teaches a lesson about the modernity of good design coming from so many different periods. Where am I? So I recall that Scalamandre left this window display up for approximately 8 months. And this is how my business started, because people started calling. But I over time, while this was going on, I built a substantial library, and I had a lot of books that focused on European architecture and the decorative arts. And Stanley Barrows previous to this moment, had been FIT's chair of the interior design department, and he was a champion of mine. And he was aware of my passion for the 18th century and arranged for me to inherit some 14 oversized portfolios from the library of Ogden Codman. And just, as a sidebar, Ogden Codman was the architect with whom Edith Wharton at the Mount, which I'm on the board of, designed that house. And I worked on Ogden Codman's last project in the United States, which was in Long Island in Brookville, which is very similar to the Mount. I realized I was a pasticheur. I was a copyist because I had no education in design, and the only thing that I could do was design based on what I had seen and what I had read in this burgeoning library of mine. But being a pasticheur was crucial for me, as it was when I started writing music. I had to increase my exposure to potential clients and participated in a series of decorator show houses, starting on the left with something that was the Cancer Research Institute, and after that at a number of Kips Bay show houses. And you can see from the photos on the top in black and white, those were the befores. And they give you 5 weeks to get these rooms together. And I never got a principal room. I only got sort of dog rooms. But I was actually content because I could show my stuff and I could prove that I could transform a sow's ear into a silk purse. I never advertised that I could do that in 5 weeks because that would be a nightmare for my career. But I had a lot of energy back then. This last image that you're seeing here was the last Kips Bay show that I did, and that was in every way 100% custom. The textiles were woven for me, the carpet was made, the boiserie was made, and I mean, everything was made. I had people from Paris come over who were doing the Blanc du Moudon technique of the painting on the paneling and gilding, and it was a royal affair. But this was the only way that I could get clients because I never worked in a design office. Clients continued to sign on, and in the next image, you'll see one of my first clients who came to me, I believe, from Kips Bay, and this was a residence in the Pierre. And as I mentioned, I have a very greedy eye as a designer, but I also had a very greedy eye as a composer. And orchestration fascinated me, and color and all of the detail about how do you get these instruments to communicate with one another, and it's absolutely the same thing in design. So here you are seeing the two pictures on the left are biaxial images of an entrance hall, and then on the right a powder room, and that was mirror and gilded bronze, and it was like being inside a Fabergé egg when you closed the door, which was also mirrored, and all of the everything was faceted, and it was nice. Had you been drunk, I don't think you'd want to be in that room. Which brings me now to the crux of my practice. In order to understand my design philosophy, you have to understand a little bit of my music philosophy, which I will get to momentarily. After reading so many books and visiting great houses in Europe, I came to understand that by examining the intellectual, cultural, and moral climate of specific periods, I could develop a deeper understanding of the arts and humanities reflected in literature, music, fashion, politics, and so on. This, of course, is called zeitgeist. If I focused on the elements that gave architecture, furnishings, and the decorative arts longevity, I might begin to understand what makes something classic as opposed to fads that go by the wayside. With this knowledge, I realized that my training as a composer was about to become useful in a new way. This was an aha moment for me. As such, I want to pause briefly to share some of those tools I acquired as a music student that would come to shape my work as a designer from that point forward. I will tell you that music, in my view, exists both in real time and in psychological time. A composer has to create a vocabulary that allows the listener to understand the language of the piece and remain engaged in it for its full duration, whether the work is solo, chamber, orchestral, symphonic, operatic. And this is transporting. And I believe that interiors and buildings and architecture also can be transporting in the same way. They can have a psychological presence. Now, I was not a performer, I was a composer, and I really haven't played in 50 years. So I'm going to make a point here, but I'm not performing for you, okay? All right, so I'm sure everybody in this room recognizes this. Those four notes, they create a leitmotif, and I refer to them as cells. They inform this entire sound universe that Beethoven created in his Fifth Symphony. And I want to point out just a couple of things, and then I'll go back into my presentation, but it'll give you a little bit of a clue about how it is that I think. So here you have the exposition. I also want to say that this theme in the first movement is written in 2/4. And there's a downbeat, and so you have this downbeat, and it goes ba-ba-ba-bum, and then there's a fermata, and it holds, as you can see in that bubble up there. And then the second bar, ba-ba-ba-bum, and I think of that as a sentence, and I think of it as a dialogue. And so then he moves on, and he does this. And then he develops it. The point is, and it's very hard to explain this at a keyboard because he voices those four notes and breaks them up, and every instrument in this orchestra is doing that little motif, and it's dovetailing from one to the next. And for example, there's this moment here that goes like this. Oops, sorry. So he's running it backwards, ba-ba-ba-bum, then he does it backwards, bum-bum-bum-bum, and there's this fabric that is being woven with the instruments based on these four notes. And if you go to, for example, the third movement of this symphony, now it's in 3/4, and this is a scherzo. And this has a feeling I would describe as a maestoso. It has a very majestic quality to it. And where you had ba-ba-ba-bum with that downbeat in 2, this is in 3/4. And now we're hearing this. Progressives, and I'm not secure enough anymore that my fingers know what they're doing. But there's this thing that happens here. And that's it's all the is that there are very, very, very few ideas. It's very economical, and he was quite disciplined. And a lot of composers have to do that because it's so abstract, and you're not generally seeing the music unless you're following it in a score. Well, okay. These same ideas apply directly to the design of a home. And in my own practice, I deliberately limit myself to a small number of ideas, these cells. They're both two-dimensional and three-dimensional. And those cells are then systematically developed and expressed through various media, including textiles, carpets, furnishings, objects, and architectural elements. Each cell is defined by a clear marker that helps organize the whole. The cells themselves can come from almost anywhere: a pattern, a texture, a material quality, a shape, or a color. But once established, they guide every decision for me. The client from the Pierre approached us after we finished that project and asked us if we would do a project for them in Palm Beach. And this house was what I would describe as Regency light. And what you're seeing here on the left is a living room, and it was done in shades of platinum gray, silver, and off-white. And the curtains, we had the fabric woven based on a Percier and Fontaine document. And the motif that you see on the valance, this detail here, is reiterated on this pillow. And that sort of X shape is an underlying design in this jacquard here. But I don't like to trivialize anything, and I'm not lazy about, oh, we'll use this fabric from the curtains and put it on a pillow. Everything has to be its own object. And so, so that expresses it in a different medium, in that case, in embroidery. There were a lot of rooms in this house, and the client said, all right, let's make this a billiards room for her husband. And she said, don't spend too much money because I'm never going in that room. So I happened to have been at Christie's, and I came across this 8-panel Coromandel screen in a beautiful shade of cognac. And I called her up and I said, I'm going to send you over a catalog with this way before email, and let me know if you like it and we'll buy it. She liked it. So I thought, all right, I'm going to design a paneled room. And what you see so first we had to document the panel, the Coromandel screen itself on the bottom left. Then I worked out all the geometries to panel the room, and found out very quickly that there was not enough material in the screen to do it. So in the next slide, you will see what are called parclose panels, narrow column-like panels. So we copied this Chinese cloud motif. We had that done in China. And then I thought, well, let's have a fabric woven that is the same scale and the same design, and we'll have the workroom measure it in such a way that it aligns completely with what's going on in the architecture, so that you have hard architecture and you have soft architecture in the curtains. And that's a device that I enjoy utilizing. Another client came aboard, and they had seen my work at Kips Bay. And these people lived in Minneapolis, and they were of Swedish descent, but they both were born in America. And they were adding a 5-story annex onto their house over there, and asked me to do that. And it was this show house that they had seen. And so I imagined a Gustavian eyrie for their primary bedroom. And because of my greedy eye, I always want the backgrounds to be highly developed. In this case, I thought that a wood-paneled room would be too heavy and decided to create a textile boiserie, if you will. I designed, and you can see over here, I figured out all the geometries and the proportions that I was interested in, and then designed a variety of textiles. There were about 12 of them, I think, including cartouche and an all-over pattern and trellis work, et cetera, et cetera. And I called up my friends at Scalamandre and made an appointment with them, and I said, I think I want you to screen print this if we can figure out a way to move forward. And they said, the yardages were not enough, and that there was this new technology called digital printing, and did I want to be a guinea pig to dip my toe into that? And I love technology, so I said, absolutely. So they, we talked about it, and they were doing business with a company in Caserta, Italy, that had invested in this machinery. And I was, instructed to create full-scale drawings in grisaille, so there were watercolors that were in grayscale, and that we would then go over to Italy, and they would scan these full-scale drawings, which were in and of themselves watercolors. They were beautiful works of art. And then they would tell me what I had to do. So we completed that work, sent the drawings over there. They scanned them, and then I went to see them. And they said, okay, we've digitized it, and it's now pixelated. And just to give you an idea, every flower has about 16 to 18 colors in it. And it was at this point that I wanted to get a revolver, because this was Sunday in the Park with George on steroids. I mean, I had to, this room was huge, and figuring out the palette was really difficult, but we did it, and it was a success, and everybody liked it. So, and by the way, I just want to point out a couple of things in the image on the right. There is a mantle that had a floral vine that it goes across the frieze of that piece, and that motif is executed in these panels here vertically in the trumeau, and I sliced it in half and ran it all the way up around the ceiling and down. You can see it there on the top of the ceiling, so if you were in bed, that's what you were looking at. And also, just as a sidebar, this beautiful pair of slipper chairs, Empire, were from the collection of Elsie de Wolf, who I was a great fan of at the time. And they had her labels on them, and they were from her own collection, so that was a bit of magic for us. Ironically, after all this work with Scalamandre, they put out a monograph, and they put that book on the cover. And just one last comment over here, that you can see from that mantle, it's expressed in embroidery on the pillows, and this is in silk, on the bed curtain panels, and the cartouche, where this was all on cotton. Lots and lots of detail. Okay. Time passed, and these clients called me, and they said, well, you made our new annex look so good, and now the old part of the house doesn't look so good. Will you come back and do that? And so I said, with pleasure. So what you are seeing here, and all this stuff was gutted. It was a pretty ordinary place. But what you are seeing here is a family room. And getting back very specifically to Beethoven's Fifth with the leitmotif, ba-ba-ba-bum, this whole space is very much organized around a grid and boxes. And so here, in its largest expression on the floor, are limestone and oak material that forms this grid. And you can see on the walls that there are two different colorways of a Lee Joffe fabric that we used on the back side of it. And so you've got these little boxes and these little squares that are set inside these larger panels. And even this fabric that is on this pair of bergères in a diamond shape was selected for the very reason that it was stretched and it was the idea of a grid. And in the next image, you will see that those boxes, so this is this fabric, which is called imprimé sur chaîne, which is what we call a warp print in English. I thought, all right, what am I going to make the equivalent of panel molding out of? So we had this embroidered, and it's imitating, but in embroidery, that shaking kind of movement that you get from a warp print. And even on these lampshades, they were woven in paper like a Bottega Veneta bag. So they're really, I don't like anything random, and everything has to support the very gestalt of what it is that we're designing. Now, this lovely couple called back years later, and they asked me if I would do something for them in Paradise Valley, Arizona. And so we went and looked at a variety of properties. Almost all of them had a Southwest flavor, and only one of them, it was the smallest one, tucked at the top of this mountain, had, in my view, the possibility to be really, really wonderful and modern, which I really hadn't done anything particularly modern up until this point. So I was a little bit apprehensive because I thought, can I rise to the occasion? I understand, the past, but do I understand the future? So, but this was the first thing that I did that was really pure music. And so I limited myself to 3 ideas in this particular project. They were stone, plaid, and corrugation. And everything in the house develops from those 3 ideas. And taking the stone as an example, and you can see it here as a retaining wall for the stair and over here by this little dining area, I found 6 different types of limestone that were variously pitted, fossilized, tessellated, and so on. And each stone came from a different part of the world. So by design, it was a different color because of the quarry that it came out of, and that the characteristic of it was very different. And those stones were installed both inside and outside in horizontal courses, establishing a rhythm and a continuity across the interior and exterior walls. And you can see on the inside that they were variously placed, projecting and recessed, and it literally penetrated the skin of the building, which you're not seeing here, but there was glass in it, and it went out there. You're also seeing the first introduction of plaid in this little bit of a carpet here, and you're seeing this corrugation in this rounded space over here, and we did that out of wood. We had to make it in small pieces so that it could make that curve. That curve was later expressed and diminished in a pair of drum tables, and these were executed there in the living room, and they had hammered metal tops which were nickel plated. So again, I'm not doing anything that is not coming out of that stone. And one last thing here, they had a great collection of first century Palestinian pottery, and I thought that it would be nice if we could present it in a curatorial fashion so that you almost felt as if you were going through a museum. And we talked at a certain point about having labels made so that their visitors could look at it and see where it came from, what the date was, et cetera, but we abandoned that. And so there you see those drum tables. There's the other one, the horizontal courses continuing more of the pottery. Pillows, so we took the curtains, and these were made for us based on, I went to the Botanical Gardens in Scottsdale, and it happened that when I was there, all of the plant life was dying, and so everything turned into these dusty shrimps, and pale mushrooms. And I said, that's it, I love that palette. So, so we took the stripes and had them hand appliqued onto pillows that were in a shrimp silk. Don't want to trivialize that. Had this cocktail table, nesting cocktail table made of plaid in bronze and in parchment. And there, I should say, you're seeing this flat weave carpet that is the augmentation of what you see in the curtains. You move into the family room, and now the colors begin to get more saturated. And I have this thing that I don't like color palettes that change from space to space unless it's a discrete room with a door. So if there is a procession, I really like to manipulate the colors and the values, and so that's what's happening here. And you have already seen a variety of examples of églamisé in my work that I do with a brilliant artist named Miriam Elner. And we've worked together since one of my Kips Bay shows, actually the show that these clients saw the work from. And so what you're seeing over here is this freestanding chimney breast that is clad in églamisé, and it too has horizontal courses that align identically with the limestone horizontal courses, and the geometries, the sizes of these pieces of glass are likewise identical. And I went out seeing, could I find 6 different types of molded glass that emulated the characteristics of the stone, and I did. So you have that fossil, you've got that, in some cases, sigillation, and you have tessellation, and you've got all of this stuff that's happening in the stone. And we intensified the palette. Miriam worked with Japan paints and different types of leaf and precious metals. And what is so beautiful about this particular thing is that as the light, the daylight, changes and moves across the room, so too does the églamisé. And even at night, if you are just moving yourself through the room, it's ever-changing and it's on fire, and it's a very beautiful thing. Just one last thing on that slide previously. If you look at the carpet, that is a high-low carpet, tone on tone, and it is the same design augmented that showed up in one of the tessellated stones. So we move forward, and that same design is expressed again in églamisé on this wall. We still maintain the horizontal courses, and this was in Japan paints and glass beads. And again, I like the idea of these shadow boxes, and even the pendant fixture, which we had made, looks as if it was pulled out of the wall, out of that shadow box, to create this dialogue between the wall and the pendant. And then the last thing I want to talk about is this. This is the house of églamisé. If you were seated in one of these 4 seats, you were looking at a sheetrock wall. And I'm very invested in making sure that vistas are well developed, and that no matter where you're sitting in a residence, that you always have something beautiful to look at. And so I thought, well, these folks are going to be gypped. So I photographed the mountain at the eye level of sitting right here, photographed it, flopped it, met with Miriam, and I said, okay, here's what I think I want to do. I want to take every texture that is in this house, whether it's plaid, corrugation, whether it is any of those stones, and like a jigsaw puzzle, I want you to take those textures and, with light and shadow, restrict yourself to those ideas. Don't do anything that doesn't do that. And she pulled it off with such genius, and there it is. And I will say that one of the great joys in my business is that I have the privilege of working with some of the most talented makers in the country, if not the world. And I grow constantly by trying to push them and find new ways to do things and think about things. And it's such a reciprocal experience that gives, I think, all of us a great amount of joy. Okay. I now am going to take you to New York City, and this is an apartment overlooking the park. And this family, this is the third generation of a family for whom I've worked. So I've got this thing crisscross going on where when I was younger, I worked for the grandmother, and this is the grandson's apartment. And they were very clear, because their parents were getting into something that was more modern, and they decided that they wanted something that was traditional. And the wife loves sparkle. So what you're seeing here are a lot of traditional ideas that are brought forward. And so, for example, the carpet in this living room here is based on a Polonaise carpet, a 17th century Isfahan, and we blew it up to a scale that you wouldn't understand at all what it was unless you were 10 floors above this apartment. And it's so abstracted and so large, and we did it in this kind of Marie Laurencin palette of dusty pinks and shades of blue, et cetera, et cetera. And the fabric that we had made on these two sofas, and it's very hard for you to see it here, but it is almost like a thumbprint. And we took that design, enlarged it, and I had this commode made, and we did this with Nancy Lorenz, another very talented artist, and I said, let's take that thumbprint, let's blow it up, and let's do, and she works in pearl and lacquer and leaf, and so she did this thing, and it's so pretty, and the palette merges so beautifully, and the curtains, those were woven for us, and this is all embroidery and beading on them that aligns with aspects of the paneling in the room. Even the passementerie, these tassels here were made, and I said, I want something more reflective. Can't you get the mill to try something in Mylar? No, that's not been done. And they tried, and they succeeded. And so this is actually Mylar, these things here. And also these tassels here, I had a very, very dear friend who, if she were alive today, would be about 106 years old. And she had Pekingese dogs, and they were always chewing on the tassels. And I asked her if I could borrow this pillow and take it at the time to Scalamandre, who were still in the business of passementerie. And I said, can you make a tassel fringe for me that looks like this? And they did. And now we do it all the time with Samuel & Sons. This is the family room. It's a bit more relaxed. And again, the furniture, the textiles, a lot of this stuff was made for us. And this table here is after a very famous model by Ruhlmann called the Cabanal. And these pair of bergères, I have a period one that I had purchased, and so we copied this. And you can't see this in the picture, but what lights me up about this the most is that this is like a musical note. It's like an eighth note. I love it. And so in Aigle-Musée, we took one of Ruhlmann's very famous motifs, this bubble motif, and rendered it there. In the next image, so there you see it close up. This is an Art Deco Lebanese chair, and I loved the fact that it had this circle and this open work. And so we got material and we had it embroidered and trapuntoed, doing the same thing that's happening over there. A mantle, this was executed, this is stone by a robot. And here we have more molded glass, gilded, also a cocktail table in molded glass. This carpet, which I designed and has very much the feeling of an Art Deco document, is reiterated in ostrich on a table here, and we got the underbelly and parts where the quills were, so that everything, I mean, there's just nothing that isn't intentional. And I do want to say that none of this stuff sticks out. and I don't want it to, because I think there's a subtle way that you see it. You don't understand it, but you get it on some level. In the dining room, we went back to Nancy Lorenz, and I had this, so we paneled the room in a Louis XVI taste, and instead of, where you would have panels here that in the 18th century would have been Boucher or Fragonard, or it would have been tapestry, or it would have been a lampas or a damask. So I thought, no, we're going to do phases of the moon, and here you can see a whole moon, and it moves in these 6 panels from a whole moon to slivers. And there is a water here that is implied, and then sky, and then all the way up there. And the water is this wavy motif, which was also executed in a Japanese textile on these chairs, which we had made that were sort of in the Lulu spirit. And I had bought from Baccarat a room-on style chandelier, but it has the idea of cracked ice, which is an ancient Chinese technique, which Nancy also incorporated into these panels. Finally, another piece of furniture that I designed is this commode Avanteau, which is after Weissweiler, and very, very carefully measured one of his pieces, but I thought, all right, if we can get chiseled glass and have it gilded on the reverse, that will bring it forward and be a very beautiful expression. Then you are leaving that dining room. Again, vistas, they mean so much to me. An enfilade, the idea of looking through a series of rooms, the rooms pulling you, drawing your eye further and further, never finding anything that is like that. Everything, it's like a flower. It's like peeling back the petals in a flower. Everything seems inevitable, but so pretty. And then this is the breakfast room here, and we had panels on the wall, very hard to see, that are in relief, and they were in a secessionist taste, and you're looking at the park there. So these were elongated trunks and branches and leaves at the top. And finally, in this apartment, this was the primary bedroom. And we had this fabric made for us, and these are French knots. And we had trim made that had, what was it? It was rose quartz and jade and amber. It was crazy. And that was then augmented in a high-low silk and wool carpet. And the fabric on the walls we had digitally printed, and so it got ombres from a very intense watermelon down to a very pale melon. Now, this is the last project that I'm going to share with you. And this is a house that I did for my partner, Marshall, and I, who were together almost 30 years now. And it's the very first thing that I've ever done for us, let alone myself. And this is in Canaan. We had a house in the Berkshires for many years. This is about 10 minutes from that house on the New York side. And I do some of my best thinking when I'm hiking and when I'm walking and when I'm lying down in bed, and I have the space to, really, really think. And I took a lot of hikes on this mountain after we purchased the property. And I came across a stone that was in a sort of a dusty grape color, and I just loved it. And I was thinking about it, and I realized on our property that there were certain trees that had a bark that were somewhere between this gray and grape color, and I said, that's it, that's the scheme. And so there you're seeing the house from the other angle. And as you go indoors, this is the entrance hall, and this is not what you would call a country house. I have a very dressy aesthetic, which you may have noticed by now. And I thought, I couldn't afford to do this in Manhattan, but I could barely afford to do it up there. And I thought, I'm going to have what I want. And so here it is. And a lot of what is happening, so there are two big things that are happening in this house. One of them, is the juxtaposition of highly polished materials and very dry matte materials. And then the other thing is the exploration of this dusty grape and putty and mushroom, and how, as you walk through the house, the hues never change, but the values do change. And you are seeing in the foreground here, by the way, an ancient amphora that has iron mounts on it that Bill Sullivan thinks could be Edgar Brandt, which would really make me excited. And so this floor in that entrance is almost like an Astaire Rogers floor. And then you go into the living room, and it's a big room. And on the right, this is the the west side of the room. This is, on the left, the east side of the room. That same commode that I loved, I tried it out for myself first before selling it to the client. Mine's in mahogany. We had this technique, this is called stuc pierre, which is on the walls. And stuc pierre is plaster that has pulverized marble dust or sand in it, and it has a very dry, very powdery kind of quality about it. And so, this is sparkling, and that's as dry as could be. And over here, I designed a lot of this furniture. We have 4 of these tables. And like everything that I do, there are 5 to 9 trades involved in it. It's a lot of furniture moving to make this stuff happen. Here, this chimney breast is laminated glass that has metal filament in it between the pieces of glass, and there's a staircase that wraps around it. So while this is very reflective, there's reconstituted oak panels that are behind that, very, very, very dry, tinted in this very dusty grape color. And everything, you can see this sort of rustication, these reveals, and it runs through everything, through all the different materials, like a ribbon that wraps around the room. Here in the dining area, these are glass panels, and I had them reverse painted. And why not do lacquer walls? Why do it in glass? Because I love narrow width fabric. I love seams, and I love paneling. And if you lacquer it, it's just sheetrock that's painted. So here there are geometries, and then the painting is set in a certain position, and I like it. And so this here is the deepest expression of that color in the house. This, as a sidebar, was made by Baklowitz and Zona, who were an Austrian lighting company. This is probably circa 1950. We had a pair of bergères. We have a pair of bergères by Folot, and I had Prell make this for this room on fabric for us in this color. And if you diminish that, you see it's the same thing that's going on in the carpet, and then diminished further on the borders of this curtain. And here is something that is absolute kismet. This is a glass artist named Fabio Maria Micucci. And I saw this at Ralph Pucci, and it is exactly what is happening in the carpet. And it's those kinds of relationships that completely light me up. And in this case, I mean, purely incidental kismet. This is the bedroom. This room is paneled, and the walls are gilded in silver, and there's a frieze that runs across the whole top of the room that is this sort of branch and blossom motif. And more furniture that I designed, silver pyrite, all this stuff. And then this gives you an idea, a little bit of the idea of the art in the house, which is very diverse, dating from about 1950 to the present day. This is, believe it or not, Pierre Bonnard, and this was an homage to, Rodin, thank you. A great Danish ceramicist, Nancy Lorenz, did this. It's on an art lift. There's a TV behind it. Hagenauer, Frederick Usher Duval, Alfred Janiot, and that is that. And I'm going to close. This is what we look at. We have this wonderful, wonderful piece of sculpture out there. And in closing, I just want to say that in music, there isn't a single note that isn't beautiful. And in color, there isn't a single color that isn't beautiful. But one note and one color have no meaning until they're side by side. And if the vibration, the frequency, the friction between those notes and between those colors isn't right, nothing sings. And so it's very important in my mind to find those moments where it's exactly the right vibration. And so the small cells that I've been talking to you about, form, texture, color, generate new entities that inform every design decision. And in my particular case, I will identify something that has meaning to me. And it's like a snowball that is rolling down a hill, and it just develops a life of its own, which is so much fun. And in the end, like a piece of powerful music, when all of these elements, decorative, architectural, when they are synchronized seamlessly, then all of those elements coalesce as if they're singing in chorus. Thank you.
Questions?
Sure, yeah.
Do you have any questions? I have a ton of them. But these are fun. Any questions?
Questions to the audience. And if everybody would just speak into the microphones that we're going to pass around so that everyone on the stream can hear you. If you raise your hand, someone will come to you with the microphone.
There's going to be a quiz if there are no questions.
We have two questions.
Okay, so that was really fantastic. Just so interesting to see how all of these elements combine, and the parallel that you're trying to show is, you made your point beautifully. My question is, did you keep up with Stephen Sondheim throughout your life and his? How did you leave it with him after being so close?
That's a good question, and I will tell you that after studying with him for 5 years, I was very afraid that I was going to become a second-rate Stephen Sondheim, and I very intentionally immersed myself in concert music because I thought he's so brilliant, and I'll never be able to do that. And I loved, particularly, I wanted to study with Samuel Barber at Curtis. He is one of the great neo-romantic composers, American-born, and they discontinued the composition department when I would have been eligible, and my parents lived on Rittenhouse Square, right across from Curtis. So that was a disappointment, but I did not keep up with him. Every now and then, I went to see every show that he ever wrote, and I wrote him notes, and I always said fantastic. But I was not I wasn't a groupie. I was a student, and I could give 18 lectures about his work, but no, it's not that I severed ties, but I knew that if I was going to have a voice, I needed to focus in a different direction.
Well, I'm sure all your clients are very glad you didn't continue in music.
Sometimes I play at their cocktail parties.
I just have a question, Michael, about the height of the ceilings in your home.
And you know what? I'm sorry that I didn't say something, because in that living room, it ramps up from about 13 and a half feet to 17 and a half feet. And there is something that happens, so that's the ceiling. And there are these prisms that are like bays that we have in the master bedroom and the guest bedroom. And it's taking that same idea, but putting it in elevation. So yeah, the ceilings are high in there.
Yeah, it's
you.
The sense of serenity in this last image, in that magnificent sculpture, the aspirin you've got, must be so tranquil.
Repeat the question, the microphone's
The question is, the sculpture that you see on the plinth, what is the story about that? Interestingly, this was in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1952 for 6 months in a group show, and it is by an artist named Davis Rossi, if that was his real name. I can't find anything about this person, and it has a sensibility of Zuniga and Maillot and Picasso. And I bought it at a dealer that I do a lot of business with in Sheffield, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires. And I saw it, and it was one of the most reasonable things that I've ever purchased in my life. And it gives me enormous pleasure. And, you know, the gods were aligning when this picture was taken, because, you know, the mist was coming up, and it was just a perfect moment to photograph it.
Yes, I want to just make a comment. I've had the privilege of working with Michael on many projects.
That's Miriam Eleanor, the Église artisan.
Yes, please. Yeah. And I want to say that he really, for me personally, and I think for probably any artist who's working with him, is an inspiration. Because one of the things for me that in my career, and that was the Arizona project where he showed you in the mountains there, where he talks about the idea of like these textures, which, as he said, you know, I abstracted the kind of scene, but we went through all the different textures in the house, and I interpreted them in Église, and that was the first time I had done it quite like that and thinking in that way. So that trajectory for me actually changed the way I worked and was just pivotal. So in that way, I wanted to say he really does, it is a true collaboration when you work with him, if you have the privilege to do that. And I think I change the way he sees and he changes the way I see. And it's a wonderful experience.
And we keep doing it, and we keep challenging one another, and, you know, and it just gets better, in my view, and deeper. And my happiest days are when I get to visit, certainly Miriam, and a handful of other extraordinary artists with whom I work. And these people are at the top of their trade, and it is, you know, for those of you who are students in here who are interior designers or are aspiring to be interior designers, these collaborations matter enormously. And I believe that beauty is a balm, and we need beauty now more than ever. And there's nothing trivial about it. And when we lift one another up, and if we have the privilege of having clients who have the financial wherewithal and the emotional wherewithal to go down this rabbit hole, at least with me, and that we can embrace our brilliant artists and get into the coloring box, in that sandbox, and create these things. I mean, for me, I feel like I'm the luckiest guy on the planet. It just lights me up. But that beauty piece, pursue it. It's so, so important.
Thank you for your talk. It was an excellent composition. Question: who is the composer or musician closest to your design style?
I would say that it's between three composers. It's between Leonard Bernstein, for sure, Stephen Sondheim, Samuel Barber, maybe a few others, Stravinsky, Prokofiev, but they're all. It's this very intellectual but beautiful approach to it. But the underpinnings are so tight. And just, just like one point, and I'm sure I'm talking too much here, but I just want to say that something that I have always loved is if you think about, first of all, the French and the Russian composers were the ones who really introduced the color that we enjoy in an orchestra. Prior to that time, if you look at a German or an Austrian orchestra, their winds, their strings, their brass, their timpani. And at the point of the late 19th century, and it's really Tchaikovsky that starts this, there's this explosion of color and new instruments. Mahler, the so-called Symphony of 1,000, his 8th symphony. And so I really love that. But when two of my favorite composers are Maurice Ravel, and Igor Stravinsky. And Igor Stravinsky, when he writes for an orchestra, it is completely pianistic. And when Ravel writes for piano, it is completely orchestral. And they're both brilliant and exquisite. But how it is that they thought and how they approached this distribution of instruments and the sound world that they created, it's just mind-boggling. And there are lessons that we can learn from every scintilla of what these people did.
You have one more hand up here? Last question.
I'll give it a go. The architect's eye. So I'm looking at this image and it's perfection. And this gentleman in front of me is standing in front of something that I wanted to discuss. The idea that you put your imprint even on the stone on which the sculpture sits, it just, I don't know how to say this, Michael, but it breaks my heart because it's so magnificent. And
You said it very well. I am moved.
And I just wanted to reiterate the connection between nature, interior design, and architecture, and music. That the iteration of a couple of notes and architecture as procession, design as procession from one space to another, a beginning, a middle, and an end. You've captured it all, and you're really quite a genius. Thank you.
It's all music. It's all music. And I will tell you that there is a track in my brain. From the moment I get up in the morning, it happens that today it was Beethoven's Fifth. Tomorrow it might be something else, but it never, ever, ever stops. Never. Thank you all for coming. I'm so grateful.
I don't normally speak after these lectures, but I just want to say, well, thank you, Michael. And Arthur looking on. I don't want to speak for Arthur, but I do stand on his shoulders. I cannot imagine a more perfect person in a lecture to epitomize what he wanted these to be. So thank you, Michael. So, I was lucky enough to be in that Fifth Avenue apartment recently with you, walking through with a group of people, and every single person on that group talked about the thread that was woven from room to room to room, and the theme. I don't know if it was Beethoven's Four Notes, but there was clearly a composition that was happening, and it was thrilling to experience. Every single detail in those spaces was a note in that composition, and we knew it, but we didn't know it. It had revealed itself, I should say, and I think that goes to the genius of your work. So I'm speaking too much now. Can we continue the conversation in our gallery space, and we'll figure out what's going musically in your head right now. So anyway, thank you for being here, and let's go to the gallery space. Thank you.